Well, I have the honor and privilege of introducing Travis to you. This is Travis Scott over here to my left. When I went to seminary, I'm not sure what I was expecting, but as I sat in Covenant Seminary's chapel orientation, I looked around and I could tell that I was just a little bit out of place. It seemed that way to me. I had long hair, probably at the time. Some of you have seen pictures, probably down to here. I normally wore ripped jeans and a t-shirt. It was pretty much my main fashion choice. I was sitting in a room full of future pastors, and most of whom I was certain wore khakis and gingham button-downs. And I turned at that time, and I whispered to Brooke in the middle of our orientation, "What are we doing here?" And then, I'm not kidding, Brian Chappell, president of Covenant Seminary, gets up and he says, the first thing he says is, he has a little head cocky, this little Brian Chappell, "Some of you may be wondering, what am I doing here?" And he launched into a talk about that, and it was encouraging to me, and somewhat encouraging, but I didn't quite feel at home at Covenant Seminary until I met Travis Scott. And the reason for that is, you see, Travis is from Michigan. And in other words, he was basically a Yankee in the midst of a seminary with predominantly Southern PCA guys, okay? And he had several tattoos, which, just all of that upped the ante of my long hair and ripped jeans and so forth. It's interesting about Travis, when we first met, we're talking about this, we were all talking about this last night. We first met at actually the very first function that we both went to at Covenant, which was a picnic, and none of us wanted to be there, right? Is that true? We were like, "Oh, we have to come to this thing because we're students and stuff." And we sat down and we immediately fell in love with the Scotts, Brooke and I. And it's this kind of relationship that you have. It's pretty rare when both spouses, Brooke and I both love Brooke and Travis equally, I think, and vice versa. I hope vice versa. I'm not sure. Digging my grave here. We just immediately connected with them, finding out that my Brooke is like a carbon copy of Travis, and apparently Brooke and I are carbon copies, which makes sense. Okay. Well, it's interesting about Travis that even though he didn't necessarily fit the Covenant Seminary mold, whatever that means, right? I soon learned about Travis that I couldn't think of anyone more fit to be at Covenant Seminary for two reasons. First, he had a theological depth to him that I have yet to encounter as a Christian. And secondly, he had a striking gift of discernment that has been a tremendous blessing to me, and I am sure those of his congregation in New Zealand. He works closely with Jaron Bars, who studied under Francis Schaeffer, and was mentored by him, and at the Francis Schaeffer Institute, where they were heavily involved in seeking to engage culture, to transform culture, and Travis is amazing at that. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Brooke and Travis indeed are dear friends of ours. Both of them were there for us in seminary in one of the darkest times in our lives. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but they made us fall in love with the church. When I first began seminary, I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I graduated. I wasn't sure why I was there, actually. I'm worship leader, parachurch ministry, but pastor wasn't really. I was like, pastor, no way. I wouldn't ever be a pastor. But I was going through a very difficult time, and I invited Travis over one night. And I mean, when I say I was going through a difficult time, it seriously was. No doubt in my mind, it was the most difficult time of my life, the darkest. And Travis came over and just sat with me and let me weep. He didn't give me any answers. He I remember saying to him earlier, earlier tonight, I asked Jesus if he would just show up. I so wanted him to just show up physically and be in the room with me that I might know that all would be okay. And Travis didn't respond. He is there with you, Nathan. By his Spirit, he's with you and knows you're suffering, something like that. He didn't respond with that at all. He said this: why don't you let us be Jesus for you? Why don't you let us be Jesus for you? And I'm not sure if he knows this, but God used that sentence to open my mind and heart to see all the beautiful ways the church, the body of Christ, was being Jesus for us in that very moment. And it made me long to be a pastor and to make the bride more beautiful so that we might be Jesus for the world. In that, I'm not kidding, in that very sentence, it awakened my heart to long for pastoral ministry. One of the things I love about Travis is that he will not shy away from telling you the truth. Yes. He's had to tell me the truth in difficult times, knowing full well that it could cost our relationship. And it hasn't, because he will tell you theological truth, he will tell you biblical truth, but also truth about yourself, and yet he does it in a way that is full of grace. You want to hate him, and yet you love him all at the same time, much like the response people had to Jesus when he walked this earth. And I am certain this is so important for his work in Auckland, and so he's going to tell you about that now.
Yeah, I think Cornerstone was one of the first churches to come on board with supporting us in our ministry in Auckland. So, many deep thanks to you, not just for that, but also for your prayer support. There are quite a few of you who pray for us regularly. You get our updates and you email back and let us know you've been praying. So that's just a personal thanks to you for the ways that you all have cared for us, even my family who you've not met until this visit. So thank you very much. I do bring you greetings from the Church in New Zealand, particularly from City Presbyterian Church in Central Auckland. I know that can sound like a cliche, but one of the things I talked about with our church before we left was trying to get them to see that what we were coming to do was actually very biblical. That we were coming back like Paul in Acts and reporting back to the churches that had sent us out to plant the church there, and bringing greetings from them back to you all. And when we go back, we'll be bringing your greetings to them, reminding them that they are part of the global work of God. And you all are that as well. I'm going to talk about that a bit tomorrow morning too, that you all are really our partners in gospel ministry. I know sometimes we don't think of missions that way. We think, well, we write a check or we'll pray, but it's really what somebody else is doing. But really, you are our partners. You are part of the ministry we're doing, so we thank you. The church thanks you. We greet you. I want this morning to mainly be a conversation. Some dialogue. I don't have notes, I don't have a presentation. What I want to do, Carter had emailed me some things he wanted me to talk about this morning, giving a bit of our vision for City Presbyterian Church and for the work in New Zealand broadly, Auckland in particular, and something of a ministry report of what's gone on. We've been on the field there for 4 years to just tell you what God has done in those 4 years, and hopefully to tell you some personal stories as well. We got a video that we're going to watch with some members that'll probably be much more interesting than anything I have to say. And then we just want to have some Q&A. I think Nathan said, make sure you got 15 minutes at the end. I'm hoping we've got like 20 or 30 minutes of Q&A, because I find that tends to be more beneficial to you all when you get to ask and hear answers to the things that you're wondering about and curious about. So feel free to stop me at any point while I'm going through this. I did have to chuckle. Nathan was talking about not feeling like he should be at seminary. I don't even know what gingham button-downs are. So I really felt out of place going there. And I remember I went to Covenant Seminary 2002, and I had kind of worked this thing in my head where, I knew God wanted us to do something. I didn't know what, but I wasn't going to be a pastor, and I wasn't going to raise support to do anything, and I wasn't going to go overseas. So this weekend at the missions conference, as you all are listening and thinking, well, this is just something I'm doing because it's part of the church, and as Scott's talking about, hey, be open to what God might be calling you to, and even as Carter prayed, what might God have in store for you, maybe some of you end up in New Zealand. I'm not joking. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. So anyways, that's quickly kind of where we come from. We didn't expect to be overseas. We didn't expect to be missionaries to a different culture. We knew we'd be missionaries to our culture. We just didn't know that our culture would be Kiwi culture. So we've been on the ground in New Zealand for 4 years. Say a little bit about why there, and then we'll maybe go into the video, and that would be some of our members talking about their experience of the culture and the life of Auckland and of the church and how it's ministered to them. Oftentimes when I kind of start this portion, I ask people to imagine New Zealand. And most of the time what people think of are either one of two things. Either it's beautiful, they've seen pictures, it's kind of the place they've always wanted to go to on a holiday or vacation, we call it holiday there, or they think of Lord of the Rings, or now The Hobbit. And the fact is that both of those thoughts are accurate. It's beautiful. It's a gorgeous place. It's, if you can make the trip, go there on vacation. You won't regret it. And Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were all filmed there. I've been to Hobbiton. I've got pictures to prove it. If anybody wants to see those, come and talk to me afterwards. The other there is actually the Wizard of Christchurch. I can tell you about that later. We do have some orcs, I think. Particularly where we minister. But the other reality to New Zealand is that it is a place that just doesn't know Christ. I was really struck by that again last night as Scott was sharing with us, and just appreciated what a good reminder it was that the reason for missions is because God is not glorified, and He desires to be glorified, and He desires to have us share in His goodness. But it's centered on Him. And Auckland is a place in particular where Christ is not named. Christ is not glorified. The nations there do not ascribe to Him glory and strength and splendor. And they don't acknowledge His rule. Now saying that, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that we have brought the gospel to New Zealand. He has been at work there for a long time. There are faithful churches that have been plugging away. But it's a culture that has by and large abandoned anything remotely Christian. It's highly, we were talking last night, I said it's rabidly secular. I was just looking at some figures the other day, and someone has speculated that by 2016, atheism will be the leading belief system in Auckland. Scott and I were talking last night, I said, that's one of the differences between, an big urban city like Houston, you probably have a lot of similar things to what we're going through. We're just a little further down the track. But for us, it is not uncommon just to meet people and they identify as atheist. Not as I believe in something, or I'm unsure, or yeah, I'm kind of Christian, but just I'm atheist and I own that, and I'm actually kind of evangelistic for it. That's pretty common. The best estimates, the most generous estimates have put evangelical, Bible-believing Christians at somewhere between 3 to 5% of the population. So it's the technical term there is post-Christian. It's kind of post-Christian, and that's really trickled down through the culture, and you see that in all sorts of ways. It's incredibly friendly culture. There's this strange paradox that the people are incredibly laid back, relaxed, very, very friendly, but also at the same time very deeply cynical and skeptical. And there's this kind of depressive undertone to the culture. It's got one of the highest suicide rates per capita of Western developed nations. For a while it was number 1. I think they've slipped down to number 3. But that's pretty shocking. Again, you think it's a very small country, 4 million people, about the size of Metro Houston. Auckland's 1.3 million people. It's a very broken culture that has forgotten about the gospel. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're longing for. And so that's why we've gone there. We went because we felt a call that this is where we were supposed to be. I'm not going to go into all the details. Some of you heard me talk about that before. Landed 4 years ago, and City Presbyterian Church consisted of Brooke, myself, and at that time our 2-month-old daughter, Sophia. So that was the church. And we've seen Christ work in some amazing ways over the last 4 years. We at the beginning of 2012, we had 15 members, which doesn't sound like much, but in our context, it's actually fairly significant. Had some others that were on the fringes, but 15 members, including children. At the end of 2012, we had 34. And that's that's including people coming to faith, people coming back to faith, people, coming from other churches to join us in the work, a wide mixture of stories and things that God is doing. But it's been really incredible for us to just watch God show up. One of the things is we've been here now since mid-December, and everybody asks, well, how is it? How is ministry? And I just got to be honest, it doesn't sound spiritual. It doesn't sound like what most people want to hear from missionaries, but it's exhausting. It's deadening. It's hard work. One of the other local pastors in our presbytery has described what we're doing in Central Auckland as trying to break rocks with your teeth. And we feel that. But at the same time, there's something that I've come to see is really, really good about that. Because in the last 4 years, I've just come to the end of myself on numerous occasions. And I've been made painfully aware of the fact that I am not the shepherd of the church. Jesus is. I am not the one who converts people. Jesus is. I'm not the one who sanctifies people. The Spirit is. And that's a good thing to be reminded of. It gives hope in the midst of working in a very spiritually dark, spiritually hard place. And it allows us to be patient with ourselves, my own failures and shortcomings, but also with where people are. And to go to the one who actually can work change in their hearts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how he's done that in a couple of people's lives. But what I'd like to do now is show you a video that some members of the church put together. I got to apologize at the beginning. There's some technical issues with it. The woman in our church who put it together worked really hard on it for about 2.5 months and then accidentally deleted everything. But in her enthusiasm, she went and threw it all back together in about a week. And so there's some sound issues. It's a little bit hard to hear. A couple translations for you. Rubbish means garbage. Tidy up means clean up. And one of the expressions, which is what most people don't understand, one of the members here will say CBD, and that's Central Business District. All right, so that's kind of the center city where we're located. Real quick, all the people that you're going to see talking are members of the church who, again, have come from various backgrounds. One couple in particular, Scott and Jen, you'll see their names up there. He'll talk about coming to look for a church about 8 months ago. So this is kind of my first personal story. Scott and Jen were a hugely encouraging picture to me of the varied ways that God brings people to himself. They both would fall into the category of what we might call de-churched. They had kind of been born into a church-going family, and then for various reasons they both kind of walked away. And then they met each other, and they went on their first date, and in the midst of their conversation it came up that they both had this past, and that they both had always felt like something was missing. And so they decided together, well, let's find a church. And they showed up, I don't know how many weeks after that, at City Pres, and they haven't left. And I had the opportunity to watch them both really come back to faith. You know, whether they were coming to faith for the first time or coming back to faith, I don't know. It's not really my place to judge that. But really watching them come back to a place where they saw Jesus as real, they knew him as Lord and God and King and Savior, and they've embraced him as that. I had the privilege of baptizing Jen a week before I married her. And that's just one of the stories. So I'm gonna shut up and let them talk. So they're just gonna give their kind of impression of spiritual climate of Auckland. They're gonna talk a little bit about the area that the church is in, which is an interesting area, as you'll hear, and how they see the church as ministering to those around them and to themselves, and that'll kind of launch into what's our vision for the church.
Well, Auckland is a very beautiful city to be living in. It's a place that's very diverse, set of people. Apparently has over 150 different ethnicities, so that brings with it its own challenges, different cultures, backgrounds, places that people are from, and naturally they bring their own different sorts of worldviews with them. I'd say the spiritual climate is quite an apathetic, post-Christian sort of spiritual climate where Christianity is kind of seen as something that is part of our heritage. It's something historically religious, but it's no longer really relevant anymore.
I think most people in Auckland would take it as a given that there is no God. It's a very atheist kind of a culture here. But if they did believe in some kind of spirituality, it would be seen as something really individual and probably kind of delving into kind of Eastern things to do with yoga and Zen and that kind of area.
I think there's a lot of good stuff happening. There's a lot of, I guess you could say, seeds being planted and a lot of flourishing in certain pockets and areas. It's overall, it's definitely got some very dark areas as well, and there are a lot of people who are just sort of wandering, not really knowing what they're meant to be doing, where they're meant to be applying themselves, what's true, what's not.
I think most people I've found tend to believe there is some higher being, but they tend to not want that to be something that would impinge on their freedom, on their way of life, their autonomy.
I can see a lot of life in you.
So where City Press is located, it's in the middle of the CBD. Lots of dark alleyways and lots of nightclubs that are actually still going at 10 a.m. on Sunday, and it really challenges you not to be judgmental of them, not to put yourself above them, but to see them as image bearers of God and to love them as Jesus loved others.
K Road, it has a fairly notorious reputation around New Zealand. It's known as basically the red light district. So between the day and the night can be rather different, especially Friday, Saturday nights. It's quite a different place. So there's a lot of need. There's a lot of a lot of ways, different ways we can serve around here.
Auckland, I guess like any sort of Western city, it's fairly broken, and that's really apparent to us at City Pres with its location, I guess. We're sort of the road that we're located on, I guess, is a hangout for a lot of prostitutes, a lot of people, with drug use, alcohol addictions, that sort of thing. And
some of the challenges we face on K Road in the future will be a lot of broken people coming in. We've had already a number of people just walking off the street, and a lot of hardships, a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of addiction for people on K Road. And I know that we genuinely love to reach out to those people and bring them the message of the gospel, which we're going to help.
I think the vibe of City Pres is fairly encouraging, fairly honest. It deals with realities of life and it doesn't kind of pussyfoot around. That's the teaching, but even reflected in the people, the way that people deal with one another seems quite honest and quite real, and we don't kind of speak in Christianese like a lot of places I've been before, so it's quite welcoming.
It's just really real. Like, there's no pretenses, like no one's trying to be somebody, and we're not trying to be cool or trendy or anything, and I just really like that. It's just real, like you can come in whatever clothes you feel like and just be who you are, and I think that that's something that really stands out to me.
I think the vibe of City Pres is a really cool one. It's mixing traditional, more I guess old school kind of church style with a new style. I think it's probably a mix because we're Presbyterian, or Grace Presbyterian, but we also have a lot of new believers and Christians from more charismatic backgrounds, and a lot of young people, so it's a really good mix.
City Pres is very warm, very, very close, small community, but a great bunch of people that really you feel welcome and part of the place. People make you feel like you matter and that what you do does make a difference, because it's small, we're all chipping in together, helping serving each other, serving and running the service and all sorts of things.
18 months ago, I was looking for a church in Auckland, and I tried a few different ones, but City Pres was, I guess, the first place that I came that I felt really welcomed straight away. And fortunately, I think that's still the case today, that we welcome people sort of from whatever walk of life they're from.
City Pres has been involved in a few different things. Practical needs with the Auckland City Mission, helping with fundraising, clothing, food, putting on concerts to help raise funds for that. And we've also been involved in park cleanups around the different parts of the city, just a real practical way of helping to beautify Auckland and to show that we care for it and its people.
Last weekend we did one of our park cleanups. I guess not the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. It's the same. It's a great way that we can serve the city and show some love for, I guess, God's creation and really just help tidy up a part of central Auckland. So that involved being in a sort of a cemetery not far from where the church is, and unfortunately it's a sort of a hangout for a lot of people that drink and drug use, that sort of thing. And we were able to get about 30 or 35 odd big bags of rubbish, bottles, cans, that sort of thing.
To make of them a tabernacle.
Well, I think the real beauty of City Pres is that it's one church that that really challenges you. So you can't just turn up and sing songs and recite these verses. It really challenges you to be active in your community, take pride in your city, and challenges you to love the people around you in your city, and all people, even the ones that perhaps are a bit more difficult to love.
I really like the teaching, to be honest. I think out of any church I've been to, I think I've had more solid teaching than I've probably ever had in my life, so really, really like that.
City Pres has always had it in its aims to be a missional church with an outreach mission that is for the members themselves to be able to talk with their own friends and to include their friends into their own community and the wider church community, and that's been really great. I've been kind of introduced to that idea and I really find it's great with my own friends.
Yeah, it's really nice just being able to be part of a really friendly community.
Our every 6-week open discussions I find really helpful. They're a great sort of forum where anyone can bring questions, not just members, anyone can bring friends. It's a non-threatening sort of environment that you can get a coffee, sit down and you just dig into the tough ones. There's no questions that are off limits.
We've been really blessed to have Rick and Travis and their family with us over the last 3 years, well, their growing, expanding family. I've learned so much from Travis and his teaching, and the church has developed in a really healthy direction, I think, with his guidance, and learning as a church to see grace in our work, grace in all of the areas of our lives, and just not to depend on ourselves. I feel that it's been a real strong kind of learning curve for the church, and we've really benefited from having them.
What kind of backgrounds?
We
daughter's probably the smartest of all of us. It's always a bit weird to see yourself on screen and realize you're wearing the exact same thing. I do have other clothes. Just to touch base on some of what came up there in the video, tell a couple stories, and then I'd like to just have the rest of the time answering your questions, anything you're wondering about. The post-Christian thing. Some of you have heard that term before. What does that mean practically? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I'll give you an example from within the church and an example from outside of the church. Within the church, so we think about culture, and we tend to think of like, well, here's Christianity, and then there's the culture. And in the culture, we're realizing more and more that they just don't know anything about God, the Bible, Jesus, that sort of stuff. In a thoroughly post-Christian culture, what we find more and more is that is the same for those inside the church. I'm currently preaching through the Gospel of Mark, and I know for some of our people who have actually been Christians for a while, this is the first time they've ever gone through the book of Mark. That what I find oftentimes in my preaching, and I'm a big fan of Tim Keller, if any of you are familiar with Keller, so the whole idea of, you talk to non-Christians in your service even if they're not there, and then they're more likely to be there. Well, every week we've got Christians and non-Christians, and so in my preaching and the way I lead through worship, there's kind of this explanatory, not dumbing things down, but translating, making things known. Here's why we do this. But that's been just as beneficial and necessary for the Christians. I find often in my sermons that my preaching has changed to having these incredibly long introductions just to say, you're not crazy or stupid for believing this. Because Christianity is not just implausible for those outside the church, more and more those inside the church who are sincere believers wrestle with this inner tension that they just have a conviction that maybe their Christianity isn't plausible and isn't realistic, and so there's this tension in there. So a lot of the ministry to the Christians is simply trying to ground them in their faith and in the historical reality of our crucified and resurrected Lord. Outside the church, it's just scorn. It's apathy. We've got a woman who became a Christian about 2.5 years ago. And she, by all accounts, as far as she can tell, she is the first person in her family to ever be a Christian. Not parents, not grandparents, not great-grandparents. She doesn't know of anybody else in her church or in her family who's gone to church. And as she wrestled through her questions, her objections, as she started to explore this, we were going through Keller's Reason for God with her, and that's kind of the context that he brought her to know him. She got really excited, and we started taking her through membership classes and started moving her towards baptism. And she tried to convince her husband to he didn't have any interest in the church, but as maybe kind of a beginning of the conversation, she really wanted him to come and be with her at her baptism. And his response to her was, no, I'm not going to come. I'm not going to support you in this. And furthermore, we're not going to talk about this anymore. Because if we do, I don't know that I can respect you. I used to think that you were a smart, intelligent woman, but if you could believe these sort of things, I'm probably wrong. That is the general consensus for many outside the church, is that if you would actually take the Bible seriously, you probably believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and goblins and trolls, and it's all lumped into the same category. So that's kind of the whole post-Christian. Here's the tension we're working with outside the church, within the church. The area that we're in, you heard some interesting conversation on it. It's actually really interesting. I didn't pick the area we're in because it's the red light district or because there's a lot of this obvious brokenness. The reason we picked it is because it's right in the middle of the city, and it's a cross-section of everything. So they're actually, the number given on there was wrong. There are over 180 different ethnic groups in Central Auckland. Where we're at is a cross-section of all of that. It's a cross-section of every socioeconomic level. Everybody's there. So we've got, prostitutes and gang members next to lawyers and artists and businessmen. It's just a cross section. So that's why we're there. So we've got this tension where on the street we've got this notorious reputation, but in the communities around where the church meets, it's a lot of single young professionals, as you would have seen in the video. It's a very young church. Our median age right now is about 25, which is encouraging and exciting, but has its own challenges, as you can imagine. And so my vision for the church, my hope for the church, is that it will just be the church, to be quite frank with you, because we don't have a lot of strong churches. It's not strong numbers-wise and money-wise. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about biblically, theologically, communally strong churches where people are connecting through the gospel. Scott got me all worked up last night. Because as I take our people through membership classes, our kind of mission statement is that we want to glorify and enjoy God by being and making disciples in Central Auckland. And we've summed that up, as you saw at the end of the video, by our call is to love God, love others, love the city. For us right now, because we're small in number, that is primarily through our worship service and through kind of things connected to that, home groups, those sorts of things. And I think one of the things that I've really come to grapple with in the context of what we're in is the priority of the church. And I think it's something that, because we live in this Western, individualized, consumeristic world, we tend, especially as Americans, we tend to view the church as one more purchasing option and not as a central reality that helps define and interpret reality for us. And so as we're coming together as a church, and I've got a lot of young people who don't have any of that, we're trying to help them to see that the church is something that Christ has established. Yes, he's died for the church, he's redeemed the church, but he's left the church here. I mean, he doesn't redeem us and pull us out of earth, because we finally got saved. He leaves the church here to be his hands, his voice, his ambassadors. And that as we come together in weekly worship, what we're really doing is rehearsing the gospel. We're practicing for reality. That's a phrase I use oftentimes when we do our profession of faith on Sunday mornings, that what this is a call back to reality. A call to worship is a call to reality. That you go into your weekly, life, and the world tells you that this is all unreal and stupid, but they're missing something, because this is reality, and we're going to prep you for that. And so as I'm planting the church, my vision, my hope is simply that we'll be the church. And that might sound really incredibly vague and general, but I can maybe be more specific in the questions that you have. One more story. I'm all over the place here. I'm ADD. So one more story, and then we'll just see what you guys want to talk about. Just another picture of how God's at work. And look, here's the tempting thing as a missionary coming back and reporting to a church is say, oh, look, here's all the great things. There are lots of bad stories I could tell you too, hard stories. I can tell you about false prophets wandering into the service and wanting to give a message after communion, and that's always tense. That's interesting. I've been called the Antichrist twice this year. We've got people we've presented the gospel to, and they've just walked away from it. Again, I don't convert people. We've got, we spent a lot of time building relations, and we still build relations. It's not like they didn't accept it and we're not friends anymore, but they haven't come to Christ. There's a lot of that, but one more really, I think, beautiful picture of how the Spirit's at work in people's heart. We've got, there's a couple that you would have seen on here. They were playing guitar and ukulele next to each other. They're on our music team. They're a young couple, actually. They just got engaged. So I do like perpetual premarital counseling because we've got a young church. But they invited a friend of theirs, Tim, to come along to church, because in conversation with him, he was expressing to them that he knew there had to be something more. He'd become dissatisfied with this materialistic view of the universe. He knew that there had to be something, and he had some respect for the Christian ethic, is what he kept calling it. I still don't know what he meant by that, but that's what he called it. So he was interested and intrigued by the church. So they invited him to come along, and this was last February, end of February, beginning of March, and from February to August, he was probably the most faithful church attender that we had, more than any of our members. He was there almost every Sunday and just listening and wrestling with the Word, with watching the sacrament. We would invite him to partake because he's not Christian. And we would get together and, we'd talk through his questions and his objections. And, he came to a place where he believed that there was a God. He was thinking more and more, it's probably the God of the Bible, but not if that meant Jesus is God. Like, he could accept the resurrection, but he couldn't accept Jesus as divine. And he's a really sharp guy. And he'd read G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, if any of you are familiar with that, before becoming a Christian. He thought, well, I'll check this out. Very sharp guy, very big questions, very big objections. And we arranged to get together one Sunday. The next day, Monday, we got together, and I'm just catching up with Tim. How you doing? Where's this? He had been wrestling through also the difference between, an intellectual understanding and a trust. What is faith? And as we're talking, I'm realizing all these objections he had are just gone. He's like, yeah, I believe Jesus is the Christ and that he is God. That, he's affirming all this. He's affirming the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, all these things that we say in church. And it was just this great picture again of, being at the end of myself. I didn't convert him. I didn't persuade him. And it was no single argument of mine or anybody's. It was the Spirit knocking down these walls. And then I said, well, okay, where are you at with the whole, is this just an intellectual thing? Or, do you think you're at a place where you can actually trust this and place your trust in Christ? And he said, well, it's interesting that you should say that. Which I always perk up when people say stuff like that. It's interesting you should say that. Yesterday during church, during the pastoral prayer, I was praying. I'm sorry, I wasn't listening to you. I was praying. And I'm like, that's okay. I want you to be praying. And he said, well, and I prayed this. And I don't know exactly how he worded it, but it was something along the lines of, God, I give up. I give up. Everything I have is yours. Every thought of my mind, every cell of my body, it's yours. And I looked at him and I said, but Tim, that sounds like faith. That's a pretty articulate expression. And he was just shocked. Really? Really? Yeah. And he had to get this big grin on his face, and we started talking about, well, the next thing you need to do is to join the church, be baptized. And, really? I thought you were going to tell me I had to wait like another year to do that. And no, and so here is God working in this young man's life, removing the obstacles to faith, bringing him to faith through the worship of the church. Now that's not the primary thing. We don't want people to just bring all their friends to church. We want them to go be the church wherever they're at. But that's kind of what I mean as well when I say as we come together as the church, we're practicing reality and we're trying to expose Christians to that, because as Christians we need deeper and deeper conversion. But also the non-Christians in our midst to see here's the outworking of the gospel. Tim, just to conclude that, he did exactly what we hope people will do. He went and invited all of his friends to come see him get baptized. And a much happier version of that, a lot of his friends who would never come to church otherwise, they've got no interest in the church, came because they loved him and they cared about him, so they wanted to come and support him. And so on the day of his baptism, we had about 50% of the people there were non-Christians. Because he, loving his friends and now loving this new Lord, or trying to, and figuring out what that means, he did kind of the Matthew thing of, hey, let's come to my party. Let me tell you about Jesus, and and that was awkward because I'm preaching through Mark, and that just happened to be the passage of if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, and if your hand causes you to sin, so they definitely heard, the gospel, but that's one more illustration of what God's doing. So I'm gonna stop there. I think I've got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes left. Is that right? Questions about Auckland, about New Zealand, about the work that we're doing, anything. It can be as general or specific as you want. Yes? That's a good question. The question was there ever a time in New Zealand when the church was predominant? And I think the best way to answer that is to say yes and no. There was a time when the church was stronger. Christian missionaries came to New Zealand like they did many other places in the world, particularly the South Pacific. If you go to the South Pacific today, what you'll find is different islands are different denominations, because it's kind of whatever missionaries reach there first, so Methodists or Presbyterians. This is ADD, but if you want to hear a really great story, I'll tell you about Vanuatu, which is another island, and there's a Presbyterian revival happening there. I mean, that's just unheard of. But in New Zealand, the first missionary there was Samuel Marsden, and there was a strong Methodist, Anglican, even a very strong Presbyterian influence through immigration. So yes, the church was always there, and there was definitely a time when more of the population would have identified as that. But I would say that there was never a time when the church was particularly strong in New Zealand. New Zealand was colonized 1840, and by that time, much of the missionaries that were arriving, the Christians who were arriving, it was a mixed bag. I mean, it's always been a mixed bag, but the Enlightenment had heavily influenced theological, biblical understanding. Romanticism had already kind of come into play there, and so there was always a pretty crumbly foundation, even from the very beginning. Yes, it was there. There's still, again, God's been at work there for a long time. It's not like, our denomination even has introduced the gospel to New Zealand, but it's never been strong. I think would be somewhere between 3 to 5% evangelical, Bible-believing Christians. Yes, sir.
Is your church, when you say City Presbyterian, are you with the PCA or the UPC or the...
What's our denomination?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're not with the PCA or the EPC because those are, those are kind of geographically American or North American. The denomination we're with would be considered a sister denomination. It's called Grace Presbyterian Church of New Zealand. It's been around for just about 10 years. Actually, this year our General Assembly will be our 10-year anniversary. When we formed, or when they formed, I wasn't there yet, they basically took the Presbyterian Church of America's Book of Church Order and adapted that. So very, very similar to EPC, PCA in different ways, but Kiwi as well. I do joke because Presbyterian in our context looks completely different than Presbyterian in this context. Presbyterian in most situations in New Zealand tends to be lower class or lower middle class. It tends to be not very highly educated. So there's a very different feel there. It's actually one of the challenges that we have right now in the denomination is most of our pastors haven't been adequately trained. A lot of them have just done a 2-3 year biblical certificate. The great hearts for the gospel, great hearts for the church and for Jesus and His kingdom, but they've not been adequately prepared. So one of the things we're trying to strengthen at this point. So yes, it's similar, but it feels very different, and it's really laid back. The whole culture is extremely laid back. I went from being the guy in the PCA, which is where we were, who was laid back, and kind of, some pastors were concerned, how could I ever be a presbyter? Because I'm like, but PCO, let's relax about some of this stuff. So now I'm the guy there who's like the administratively gifted one. And I didn't change. I'm the one who's like, hey, we've got a Book of Church Order. Let's do some stuff here. So there is a different feel, but it's very, very similar. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Trey.
Two quick ones. Why are they called Kiwis? And then the City Christ Church.
Yep.
Which is an interesting name for people that are 3 to 5% Christian. So what is the heritage of Christ Church?
Yep. Kiwi, your guess is as good as mine. You've got kiwis, the birds, kiwi fruit. Kiwi is just kind of the name they've adopted. Yeah, that's where they're from. So the kiwi, which is a flightless bird, there were no natural predators, or mammals, I should say. So all the birds that developed were flightless birds. And the kiwi is one of those, which our Kiwi friends like to joke that their national bird can't fly. There's something strange about that. So that's why. That's just the name they've taken for themselves. Christ Church, the history of that is that was an Anglican or Church of England settlement, which is why it had the name. And it started off much more as not a missionary community, but it was an intentional kind of planned community where the hope was that the church would be the center of that community. That didn't last very long. Similar things there's another city on the South Island called Dunedin, which just means New Edinburgh, and that's where all the Presbyterians went, and they had a similar hope for that, and again, it didn't last long. Auckland, very different from both of those historically, was always a commercial city. That was always the intent for Auckland. It was the capital at one point, and then that moved to Wellington. Another figure I probably should have shared with you, another reason we see Auckland as strategic in reaching New Zealand is it's 33% of the population of the country lives there. All right, so it's the biggest city. It's not the capital, but it's the biggest city. And you put that in perspective, New York is about, I think, 2% of the U.S. population. And you think about how influential New York is. So Auckland's 33% of the population. Anyways, that has nothing to do with Christchurch. Yeah. Yes?
I think that and society as an atheistic culture is very similar to a Christian, post-Christian culture in that you have very what are called lazy atheists and you have very evangelistic atheists. Okay. What are the two, from both sides of that atheist perspective, what are the two arguments that mostly you get from people that you talk to? From the lazy side and then from the evangelistic side?
Yeah, from well, there's overlap there. And be a lot of the similar things that you would probably hear here. Christianity in particular is exclusive, it's unscientific, it's intolerant, it's all those sorts of things. So it's not so much a defense for atheism as here's why we could never accept what you believe. One of the things I've heard multiple times is, I've had a few people engage me with this, and one of our church members has been engaged this way as well. If they start off and asking me, do you believe in Zeus? Oh, no, I don't believe in Zeus. Do you believe in, Buddha, this and that? And they just say, well, see, I just disbelieve in one more God than you. It's just kind of, that would be one of the lazy approaches to it. One of the more kind of ardent approaches would be, let's look at science. Science has disproved God. I think that's actually kind of a lazy position too, because it's not true and it's not very scientific. But Richard Dawkins, the new atheist, that's all very, very popular there. So it'd be that kind of, in the hardened camp, it wouldn't just be Christianity is irrelevant, it's bad. Kind of Christopher Hitchens, how, God poisons everything or religion poisons everything, that kind of approach. We've got, Brooke goes to a knitting group every fortnight, which is every 2 weeks or so. And she goes with another woman from the church. And this woman from the church is actually a tent maker missionary, someone who came from the States to be with the church. I'll talk about that more tomorrow. And she came as a nurse practitioner. She had been at the Mayo Clinic for 20-some years. So it was pretty easy for her to get a job in New Zealand. She's a lecturer at the university in the nursing program. Well, that really threw off the woman who hosts this knitting group, because she's definitely in that second camp of atheists. She's very, she proselytizes for atheism. And it threw her off that Sandy, this woman in our church, had medical training, scientific training, and still could believe in Christianity. And so she took her out to coffee and just hammered her with a bunch of questions and had a stack of Richard Dawkins books and said, you need to go read these. So that would be the tension. Most would just be, it's irrelevant and silly and probably unhealthy, that they haven't really thought it through. So, yeah.